The grocery store was buzzing with the usual afternoon rhythm, a mix of footsteps, quiet conversations, and the soft beeping sound of items being scanned at the register. Outside, the sun had already started leaning toward the evening, sending golden rays through the glass doors every time someone entered. Marcus, a young black cashier in his early 20s, was on his shift behind the counter. He had been working at the store for nearly a year now, and though the job wasn't glamorous, he always tried to keep his energy positive. With his neatly pressed uniform and a friendly smile, he had a way of making customers feel comfortable. That day was like any other. The store had a steady stream of people, families grabbing groceries for dinner, teenagers picking up snacks, and a few elderly shoppers who walked slowly with their carts. Marcus greeted each one warmly, not because he had to, but because he genuinely believed small kindnesses made the day easier. He joked with some customers, offered to double bag heavier items, and always ended each transaction with, "Have a good day." As the line moved along, an elderly woman appeared next. She looked gentle and kind, with silver gray hair tucked under a simple scarf. Her clothes were clean but old, showing signs of wear. She walked carefully, leaning slightly on her cart, and smiled faintly as she placed her items on the counter. There weren't many things, just a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, a few cans of soup, and some fresh apples. They were the sort of basics one might buy to get through a week without spending too much. Marcus scanned each item, placing them neatly into bags, and pressed the total button. "That will be $14.85, he said politely. The woman nodded and reached into her small, worn-out coin purse. She opened it slowly, her fingers trembling a little as she began to count her change. There were a few dollar bills folded inside, but most of what she had was in coins, quarters, dimes, and pennies that clinked softly as she laid them down. Marcus waited patiently, watching her lips move as she whispered the numbers to herself, making sure she didn't lose count. When she finally finished, she pushed the pile of coins and bills toward him with a small sigh of relief. Marcus quickly counted it on the counter, his fingers moving with practice. Then he noticed something. He glanced at the screen again, then back at the money. She had given him $14, but the total was $14.85. She was short by 85 cents. For a moment, Marcus hesitated, not wanting to embarrass her. He leaned closer and spoke softly. "Ma'am, you're just a little short. The total is $14.85. You gave me $14. The elderly woman blinked in surprise, then quickly reached back into her purse. She searched again, pulling out a few more coins, but they were only pennies, 12 of them in total. She spread them across the counter and looked up at Marcus with worried eyes. "Is that enough?" she asked in a voice that was gentle but filled with uncertainty. Marcus shook his head kindly. "Almost, but still not quite," he said. Her face flushed with embarrassment. She looked down at her hands, clearly distressed. Behind her, the line had started to grow. A man shifted impatiently, glancing at his watch, while a young mother tried to calm her restless child in the cart. The atmosphere around them was beginning to tense. The elderly woman sighed deeply. "Maybe I should put something back," she whispered. She reached toward the bags, her thin fingers trembling as if she were deciding which item she could live without. The thought of giving up even one of her small necessities seemed heavy on her. Marcus felt a tug at his heart. He thought about his own grandmother, who often told him how hard it could be to live on a fixed income. The image of this woman giving up her bread or milk because she lacked a few cents felt wrong. He could not let her walk away with less than she needed over something so small. Before she could remove anything, Marcus reached into the pocket of his uniform pants. He felt around for some loose change and pulled out a few coins he had kept there for the vending machine during his break. Among them were 3 quarters and a dime. He placed them gently on the counter and added them to her money. "There you go," he said warmly. "It's all covered." The woman froze, her eyes wide as if she hadn't expected kindness. She looked at the coins, then back at Marcus. Her lips trembled as tears began to well up in her eyes. "Oh, dear, you didn't have to do that," she whispered. "I didn't want to trouble anyone." "It's no trouble at all," Marcus replied with a calm smile. "It's just 85 cents. I'm glad I could help." The people in line who had been growing impatient a moment earlier suddenly grew quiet. A few of them softened, watching the moment unfold. The man who had looked at his watch sighed, his expression changing. The young mother smiled faintly, squeezing her child's hand. The elderly woman wiped the corner of her eye and whispered again, "Thank you, son. You don't know how much this means to me." Marcus simply nodded and handed her the bagged groceries. "Take care of yourself, ma'am," he said. As she picked up her bags, her posture seemed lighter, as if the weight of her worry had been lifted just a little. She looked at him one last time, her expression filled with gratitude, before slowly walking away. Marcus turned back to his register, continuing with the next customer, but the moment stayed with him. He hadn't done it for recognition, nor for praise, he had done it because it was the right thing to do. To him, it was such a small amount of money. But to the elderly woman, it had been much more than coins. It had been dignity, kindness, and the feeling that she wasn't alone in the world. What Marcus didn't realize in that instant was that his act of generosity had been quietly noticed by more than just the woman and those in line. Someone further back had taken out their phone, capturing the moment discreetly. They hadn't recorded it to shame anyone, but because they were touched by the cashier's compassion. Later that evening, that small clip would find its way online, and the story of the 85 cents would travel farther than Marcus could have ever imagined. The elderly woman walked slowly out of the store, her small grocery bag swinging gently by her side. She kept looking back once, then twice, as though she still could not believe what had just happened. Her heart felt lighter, and her eyes still held the tears from the kindness she had received. It had been only 85 cents, but for her, the memory of a stranger's compassion would stay much longer than the groceries she carried. Inside the store, Marcus went back to his work, scanning items for the next customer. To him, it wasn't a big deal. He had given away less than $1, something that most people would not even think about. He had no idea that what he had done was quietly being carried beyond that store. A young woman who had been standing in line a few customers back had noticed everything. She had been waiting, holding a basket of snacks, when she saw the elderly woman's nervous hands, the coins being counted, and Marcus stepping in with his own change. Something about that moment had touched her deeply. Without thinking too much, she had lifted her phone and snapped a quick picture, capturing the scene without disturbing it. Later that evening, when she returned home, she opened her social media and wrote a short post. "Today at the grocery store, I saw something beautiful," she began. She described how a cashier helped an elderly woman who didn't have enough money, paying the missing 85 cents himself with such kindness that it brought the woman to tears. She uploaded the photo, making sure not to reveal anyone's face clearly, just enough to show the act itself. At first, she thought maybe a few of her friends would read it and feel touched. She didn't imagine what was about to happen. Within an hour, the post began to gain attention. Friends commented, "This made my day," or "Faith in humanity restored." Then those friends shared it, and their friends shared it too. By midnight, the post had been shared thousands of times. Strangers from across the city, and even from other countries, began leaving comments. They weren't just praising Marcus, they were also sharing their own experiences of small kindnesses, moments when someone had stepped in at the right time with a helping hand. Back at home, Marcus had no idea any of this was happening. His phone buzzed once or twice with messages from friends, but he didn't pay much attention. He was sitting with his younger brother, helping him with homework, as he often did after work. Life was simple for Marcus. He wasn't the type to chase fame or attention. All he wanted was to make ends meet, help his family, and hopefully build a better future. Meanwhile, the elderly woman was sitting at her small kitchen table, carefully putting her groceries away. She lived alone in a modest apartment. It was quiet, except for the faint ticking of a wall clock. As she placed the bread in the cupboard and the milk in the fridge, she thought again about the young cashier. She wished she had been able to thank him more properly, but her emotions had taken over in that moment. She promised herself that next week, when she returned to the store, she would find a way to express her gratitude. The next morning, Marcus walked into the store for another shift. Things looked the same: the aisles stocked, the bright lights overhead, the sound of carts rolling across the floor. But something felt slightly different. When he stepped behind the register, his manager approached him with a curious smile. "Marcus, you're all over the internet," the manager said with a laugh. Marcus frowned in confusion. "What do you mean?" The manager pulled out his phone and showed him the post. Marcus stared at the screen, stunned to see his small act of kindness had reached thousands of people. The caption described the event in such heartfelt words that even he felt moved reading it. Comments flooded the page: "This young man deserves recognition, we need more people like him, such a beautiful soul." Marcus shook his head slowly. "I didn't do it for this," he murmured. "It was just 85 cents. The manager clapped him on the shoulder. "Maybe to you it was just coins, but to her and now to everyone else it was something much bigger." By lunchtime, people had begun visiting the store after seeing the viral post. Some wanted to meet the cashier in person, while others quietly observed him from a distance, touched by his humility. A few even came through his line, just to say, "Thank you for what you did." At first, Marcus felt awkward. He didn't like being in the spotlight. He kept telling people, it was nothing, really. But the more he heard their words, the more he began to realize that maybe kindness worked like ripples in water. What seemed small could spread farther than anyone imagined. That evening, as Marcus walked home, he noticed the world around him differently. People on the street seemed warmer, smiling at each other, holding doors open, helping someone carry heavy bags. It was as if the story had inspired not just those who had read it online but those who lived in his community as well. He thought back to his grandmother's words, "Kindness is contagious. Pass it on, and it will multiply." Now he understood. The elderly woman, too, began to feel the ripple of the moment. A neighbor knocked on her door later that week with a basket of fruit, saying they had read about her story online and wanted to check in on her. She was touched that strangers cared, all because a young man had reached into his pocket for a few coins. She held the basket close and whispered to herself, "Goodness still exists in this world." But the story didn't stop there. News outlets began to pick it up. A local TV station contacted the grocery store, asking if they could interview Marcus. At first, he hesitated. He wasn't seeking attention, and he worried that appearing on television would make it seem like he had done it for show. But his manager encouraged him, reminding him that the story was no longer just about him, it was about inspiring others. When Marcus finally agreed, he spoke humbly during the interview. "It wasn't about the money," he said. "Sometimes people just need to feel cared for. If I had let her put something back, it would have hurt her pride. Helping her was the least I could do." His words were simple, but they carried weight. Viewers watching from their living rooms felt a warmth in their hearts. Soon after, letters began arriving at the grocery store addressed to Marcus. Some contained words of thanks, others had small gifts, and a few even had donations for local charities in his name. Marcus was overwhelmed, but he decided to use this attention for good. He spoke to his manager about organizing a small fundraiser at the store to help elderly shoppers who struggled to afford groceries. The manager agreed, and within days, posters went up announcing the effort. Customers began contributing willingly, and the fund grew steadily. Marcus had never imagined that one small moment could lead to so much. He thought again about the elderly woman who had started it all. To him, she was a reminder that sometimes the smallest encounters could leave the biggest impact. He knew he would see her again soon, and when he did, he wanted to tell her how her quiet gratitude had changed not just his day, but his whole outlook on life. And so, what had started as a shortfall of 85 cents was turning into something far greater, a reminder to the world that kindness doesn't have to be grand to be meaningful. The days after Marcus's act of kindness felt different, though he still tried to live as normally as before. Every morning, he put on his uniform, tied his apron neatly, and walked to the grocery store. Yet something in the air had changed. Customers who had once walked through the aisles silently now greeted him with warm smiles. Some whispered his name to each other as if he were a local hero. Others came through his line, not because it was the shortest but because they wanted a chance to say hello to the cashier who had touched so many hearts with 85 cents. Marcus remained humble through it all. Whenever someone thanked him, he shrugged gently and said, "It was nothing, really." To him, helping that elderly woman had been the obvious thing to do. He didn't see himself as special. But what he didn't realize was that the story had begun to grow even bigger. It wasn't just in his neighborhood anymore. The photograph taken by that young woman had spread far beyond the city. Newspapers in other states were writing about it, and online blogs were calling it the story of the week. Everywhere, people were talking about the small gesture that had reminded them of the importance of compassion. One evening, Marcus sat at home with his mother. She had just returned from a long day of work and was tired, but when she sat down, she placed her phone on the table and smiled at him. "You know, your grandmother would have been proud of you," she said softly. Marcus looked at her, puzzled. "Proud of me? For what?" She chuckled. "Don't act like you don't know. I can't even walk into work without people asking if you're my son. They saw you on the news." Marcus sighed and shook his head. "I didn't mean for all of this to happen. It was just 85 cents. Anyone could have done it." His mother reached across the table and touched his hand. "That's the point, Marcus. Anyone could have done it, but not everyone would. That's why it matters." You reminded people of something they had forgotten, that kindness can be simple. The words stayed with him long after the conversation ended. That night, as he lay in bed, Marcus thought about how quickly life could change. Yesterday, he had been just another cashier. Today, he had become a symbol of kindness for strangers around the world. It was overwhelming, but also beautiful. Meanwhile, the elderly woman who had been at the center of it all was thinking about Marcus too. She had returned to her apartment after her groceries were gone, and the memory of that day kept replaying in her mind. She had lived alone for many years, ever since her husband passed away. Life had been quiet, sometimes lonely, and she often felt invisible in the world. That was why Marcus's gesture had touched her so deeply. It wasn't just the money, it was the way he had treated her with dignity, with patience, with respect. She decided she would not let the moment pass without doing something in return. The following week, she baked a small pie, the kind she used to make for her family years ago. She placed it carefully in a container, wrapped it in a towel to keep it warm, and made her way back to the grocery store. Her steps were slow but steady, and her heart was full of determination. When she arrived, Marcus was again at the register, scanning items for a line of customers. She waited patiently until it was her turn, then placed the container on the counter. Marcus looked up, surprised. "Oh, hello again, ma'am. Did you find everything you needed today?" The woman smiled warmly. "I came here not just for groceries. This is for you." She pushed the container toward him. "It's a pie I made myself. I wanted to thank you properly for what you did last time." Marcus felt a lump in his throat. He opened the container slightly and the sweet smell filled the air. "You didn't have to do this," he said softly. "But I wanted to," she replied. "Because of you, I walked out of here that day with my head held high. You reminded me that I still matter." Her eyes glistened with emotion. The customers around them, who had overheard the exchange, smiled and nodded. Some even clapped quietly. Marcus blushed, a little embarrassed by the attention, but he also felt proud. He realized then that kindness wasn't just about the act itself, it was about how it made people feel afterward. What neither of them realized was that another customer in line had recognized the elderly woman from the viral post. She, too, took a photo not to exploit the moment, but to show the world how the story had come full circle. That picture was shared online later that day with the caption, "The woman returns to thank the cashier who changed her day." Kindness creates kindness. Once again, the story spread, reminding people that goodness doesn't stop with one act, it multiplies. Across town, people were beginning to feel the ripple effect. A man who had read the story decided to pay for the groceries of a young mother struggling at a different store. A teenager gave up his bus seat for an older gentleman, saying he had been inspired by the 85-cent story. Even local teachers began telling their students about Marcus, using his example to encourage compassion in classrooms. One Sunday morning, Marcus walked to his neighborhood park. He liked going there on his days off, sitting on a bench under the tall oak trees, listening to the sound of children playing. As he sat, he overheard a little boy talking to his mother. "Mom, is that the man who helped the grandma in the store?" The mother looked over, smiled, and nodded. She whispered something to her son, who ran over shyly. "Thank you," the boy said simply before running back. Marcus couldn't help but laugh softly. He never imagined children would recognize him in the park. Though the attention was flattering, Marcus still held onto his humility. Whenever people tried to call him a hero, he gently corrected them. "I'm just a cashier," he would say. "I just did what felt right." But deep inside, he was starting to understand that perhaps the world needed reminders like his. Not because he was extraordinary, but because people had forgotten how powerful ordinary kindness could be. As the days passed, Marcus grew more comfortable with the new reality. He didn't seek the attention, but he embraced the responsibility. If his story could inspire even one more act of compassion, then it was worth every interview, every photo, every moment of recognition. Back at the store, things began to feel alive in a new way. Customers started talking to each other in line, sharing smiles instead of impatient sighs. The staff noticed the difference too. There was more warmth in the air, more patience, more laughter. It was as if the spirit of that one moment had spread through the walls of the grocery store itself. The elderly woman, now a familiar face, continued to shop there every week. Every time she saw Marcus, her eyes lit up, and she always stopped to chat with him. They formed a quiet friendship, one built not on grand gestures, but on a shared memory of kindness. For her, Marcus was no longer just a cashier. He was a reminder that even in her later years, she was seen, valued, and respected. The following weeks brought even more changes than Marcus could have imagined. What had started as a small moment at the checkout counter had grown into something far larger than him, larger even than the store where it had happened. The story of the 85 cents had continued to spread, reaching more people each day. Local newspapers wrote about it, then bigger outlets picked it up, and soon Marcus's name was known far beyond his city. He wasn't just the cashier at the grocery store anymore, he was being called the young man who reminded the world about kindness. At first, Marcus felt uncomfortable with all the attention. He was a private person who never thought of himself as someone special. To him, kindness was natural. Yet everywhere he went, people recognized him. Some would stop him on the street, asking if he was the cashier from the story. Others shook his hand, saying things like, you restored my faith in people. Each time, Marcus gave a polite smile and replied humbly, it was just what anyone should do. But deep down, he began to realize that what felt small to him had grown into a lesson for others. The grocery store itself began to feel different. Customers came not only to buy food but also to experience the warmth they had heard about. The once ordinary shop had turned into a place where people were kinder to each other. Strangers started helping one another with carts, holding open doors, and offering to pay for someone's small missing items, sometimes even mentioning Marcus's story as their inspiration. The manager noticed the change too and often told Marcus, "You've done more for this store than any advertisement ever could." One day, a television crew arrived to film a segment about him. Marcus didn't want to be in front of cameras, but after some gentle persuasion, he agreed. They set up their equipment near the register, interviewing both customers and co-workers. A woman who had been in line the day of the event spoke with emotion in her voice. "I saw it with my own eyes." He didn't hesitate, didn't make her feel ashamed. He just helped her. "That's something I'll never forget." The crew later asked Marcus why he had done it. He answered simply, "Because she needed it, and I could help. That's all there is to it." His sincerity touched the viewers watching from home. The elderly woman herself was invited to share her side of the story. She told the reporter how she had felt that day, small, embarrassed, and invisible, until Marcus's kindness reminded her that she still mattered. "He gave me more than 85 cents, she said softly. "He gave me back my dignity." Her words moved people deeply, and the clip spread widely online. Soon, community leaders reached out. A local charity dedicated to helping seniors contacted Marcus, asking if he would like to be part of their campaign. They explained that many elderly people lived on fixed incomes and struggled with the rising costs of food and medicine. Marcus agreed immediately, knowing the issue was real. He had seen customers count pennies, just like the woman had. If he could use his small spotlight to make a difference, he wanted to. The store partnered with the charity to launch a fundraiser. A donation box was placed at every register with a simple message, "Give a little, help a lot." Customers began dropping in spare change, sometimes bills, sometimes even notes of encouragement. To everyone's surprise, the donations grew quickly. Within weeks, the campaign had raised enough money to provide grocery vouchers for dozens of elderly residents in the neighborhood. The local news covered the success, highlighting Marcus as the spark that had set it all in motion. Marcus's co-workers looked at him differently now too. At first, they teased him a little, saying things like, "Don't forget us when you're famous." But underneath the jokes, there was admiration. They noticed how he treated every customer with patience, no matter how busy the store was. His kindness wasn't just a one-time thing, it was part of who he was. Some of them even admitted that his story had changed how they viewed their own roles. One cashier told him, "I used to think this job was just about scanning items. But you showed us it's about people too." Even Marcus's family began to feel the effects. His younger brother told his friends at school about what happened, proud to say, "That's my brother." His mother walked taller, proud of the son she had raised. She often reminded Marcus, "You may not think you're a hero, but you've given people hope. That's a gift not everyone can give." But perhaps the most touching moment came when the elderly woman returned again. This time, she wasn't alone. She had brought her granddaughter with her, a young woman in her 20s. The granddaughter hugged Marcus with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for being there for my grandmother," she said. "Your kindness reminded me to pay closer attention to her needs too. You changed more than just her day, you changed our family." Marcus felt humbled once more. He realized that kindness created ripples that touched lives in ways one could never predict. What he thought had been just a small act had now become part of many people's stories. As the fundraiser continued, word reached the city council. They invited Marcus to a community event where he was honored with a certificate of recognition. Standing on stage, Marcus felt nervous as the crowd applauded. When he was asked to say a few words, he took a deep breath and spoke from his heart. Kindness doesn't cost much. Sometimes it costs nothing at all. But it can mean everything to someone else. If we all try to care just a little more, the world will be brighter for everyone. The audience rose in a standing ovation, touched by the honesty in his words. The recognition didn't change Marcus. He still worked his shifts, still smiled at every customer, still offered to help whenever he could. But it gave him a new sense of purpose. He realized he had a responsibility now, not just to keep being kind himself, but to encourage others to do the same. Letters continued to arrive at the store. Some came from people nearby, others from far away. One letter was from a woman across the country who wrote, "I was having a hard time believing in people again. Then I read about you. Thank you for reminding me there is still goodness in the world." Another came from a child who sent a long 85-cent tape to the paper, writing, "This is for the next person who needs help." Marcus kept those letters, reading them whenever he felt overwhelmed. They reminded him that small acts could touch countless lives. Through all of this, Marcus never let pride take over. He often told people, "I'm no different from anyone else." We all have the power to make a choice to help, or to walk away. I just chose to help. His humility was part of what made the story so powerful. People believed in him because he was genuine. And so, the simple act of covering 85 cents had blossomed into a wave of kindness that spread across the community and beyond. Marcus hadn't asked for attention, but he accepted it with grace, using it to inspire others. The elderly woman, once embarrassed and worried in a checkout line, now walked with her head high, knowing that her story had reminded the world about compassion. As weeks turned into months, the story of Marcus and the 85 cents continued to ripple far beyond the walls of the grocery store. Though the first wave of attention eventually calmed, its impact never faded. People still whispered about the story at bus stops, in schools, at workplaces, and even at family dinner tables. It had become more than just a viral post. It had become a gentle reminder that kindness was alive, waiting in the hearts of ordinary people. Marcus himself never let the attention change who he was. He still woke up early each day, tied his apron neatly, and greeted every customer with the same patience and respect he had always shown. Some days were tiring, with long lines and endless transactions, but he kept his warm smile. He knew now that each customer wasn't just a person buying food. They might be carrying heavy worries, hidden struggles, or quiet hopes. A kind word or a little patience could make a difference in their day, just as it had for the elderly woman that afternoon. The elderly woman, whose name was Mrs. Thompson, became a familiar and beloved face in the store. She visited every week, sometimes with her granddaughter, sometimes alone, always stopping by Marcus's register when she could. Their short conversations grew into a gentle friendship. She told him stories about her younger days, about her late husband who had worked hard all his life, and about the simple joys she still found in small things, like tending to her little garden or baking pies. Marcus listened with genuine interest, treating her words with care. To him, she wasn't just the woman from the story. She was a person with a history, a heart, and a voice that deserved to be heard. One quiet afternoon, after the store had slowed down, Mrs. Thompson handed Marcus a folded piece of paper. "I wrote you something," she said softly. Marcus opened it later during his break and found a handwritten letter. In it, she described how his kindness had restored her faith in people. She explained that before that day, she often felt invisible in the world, as if nobody noticed her struggles. But when he stepped in to help, she felt seen again. "You reminded me that even in the later chapters of life, kindness can touch us and remind us that we still matter," the letter said. Marcus folded it carefully and placed it in his pocket, knowing he would keep it forever. The community continued to build on the spark Marcus had created. The donation boxes at the store raised more than anyone expected, and soon a program was established to help seniors in the neighborhood with grocery vouchers. Volunteers from local schools and churches joined in, delivering food to elderly residents who couldn't make it to the store themselves. Marcus often helped on his days off, quietly carrying bags of food to doorsteps, offering a smile, and asking if they needed anything else. He never sought credit for these actions, he simply believed it was right to give back. The story even reached beyond the community. Schools across the state used Marcus's example in their classrooms, encouraging students to write essays or give speeches about kindness. Teachers explained how a small act could grow into something powerful. Children wrote about how they, too, wanted to help others, whether by sharing their lunch with a classmate, standing up for someone being teased, or helping their parents at home without being asked. Marcus never read all those essays, but the fact that they existed made his heart swell with quiet pride. Despite all the attention, Marcus's life remained humble. He still lived with his family, still saved money for college, still dreamed of building a better future. But something inside him had shifted. He no longer saw his job as just work, he saw it as an opportunity to meet people, to touch lives, even in small ways. He had learned that kindness was not about the size of the gesture but about the heart behind it. One evening, as the sun set behind the city and painted the sky with shades of orange and gold, Marcus walked home from work. Along the way, he noticed a young boy sitting on the steps of a small shop, looking sad. Marcus paused and asked, "Are you okay?" The boy looked up and explained that he had dropped his ice cream, and his little sister was crying because she didn't get any. Without thinking, Marcus walked into the shop, bought 2 ice creams, and handed them to the children. Their faces lit up instantly, and their laughter filled the air. As Marcus walked away, he thought about how kindness had become a natural part of his life, not because of fame, but because he had seen how powerful it could be. Back at home, his mother often reminded him that fame fades but character lasts. "People will forget the headlines one day," she told him. "But they'll never forget how you made them feel." Marcus carried those words with him like a compass, guiding his actions. Mrs. Thompson's health grew more fragile with time, but she never stopped coming to the store as long as she could. One day, she looked at Marcus with tired eyes and said, "You know, young man, when my time comes, I'll leave this world knowing that kindness still exists because of you." Marcus felt his throat tighten as he promised, "Kindness will always exist, ma'am. I'll make sure of it." Eventually, the original social media post faded into the background as new stories captured people's attention. But the effect it had on those who read it lingered. Many continued to share their own small acts of kindness, using Marcus's story as a reminder. In countless little ways, holding doors open, paying for someone's bus fare, checking on elderly neighbors, the spirit of 85 cents lived on. Marcus never became rich or famous, but he gained something far greater, the respect and love of his community, the gratitude of those he helped, and the knowledge that he had made a difference. The world didn't change overnight, but hearts had been warmed everywhere by his simple gesture, and those ripples of compassion would continue long after the story was forgotten by the headlines. As he stood at his register one ordinary afternoon, scanning groceries with the same calm patience, Marcus thought about everything that had happened. He realized that the story was never truly about him, it was about the lesson. It was proof that kindness has the power to spread beyond walls, beyond borders, beyond time itself. A few coins, a simple smile, a choice to help rather than ignore, those were the things that changed lives. The elderly woman's letter remained tucked safely in his wallet, a constant reminder of that day. Every time he looked at it, he remembered that no act of kindness is ever too small, and no person is ever too insignificant to deserve it. And so, what began with 85 cents ended with something priceless, a legacy of compassion, a reminder to the world that even the smallest gestures can warm hearts everywhere, leaving behind a light that never goes out.